dive into today's episode, I just want to remind you to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Your support means the world to us. It helps us grow, reach more amazing learners like you, and keep bringing you fresh and fun content every week. So don't forget, like, subscribe, and let's keep this journey going strong. Hello, fabulous word learners, and a very enthusiastic, warm welcome back to another exciting episode of Idiom Insights. I'm Emma, your ever-curious guide through the sometimes quirky, often surprising, but always fascinating world of English phrases and expressions. It's truly wonderful and a genuine pleasure to have you with us again today as we embark on another linguistic journey.
And I'm Jack, your co-host and resident phrase fancier, equally thrilled to be here, ready to unpack some more linguistic treasures and maybe, just maybe, trip over a few syllables or complex definitions along the way. All in good fun, of course. It's absolutely great to be back in the Idiom Insights studio with you, Emma, and with all our dedicated listeners tuning in from around the globe.
It's always an adventure, isn't it, Jack? And today, we've curated a lineup of 4 really useful, incredibly common, and wonderfully descriptive idioms. These are phrases you'll definitely hear if you're listening to native English speakers chat, watching popular movies, or binging those addictive TV shows. Understanding these will seriously level up your comprehension skills and, just as importantly, help you sound more natural, more fluent, and more confident when you speak English.
Absolutely, Emma. These aren't obscure, dusty old phrases. These are the living, breathing kind that pop up all the time in a multitude of different situations, from casual chats to more formal discussions. And I must say, I'm particularly excited about today's selection. They're quite vivid. So, without further ado, here are the 4 idioms we'll be meticulously exploring in this insightful episode of Idiom Insights.
First up, a phrase for that unfortunate situation when you make a bad situation even worse, or something bad happens on top of something else bad. Add insult to injury. Next, an idiom that's all about being kind, patient, and understanding towards someone, especially when they might be struggling. Cut somebody some slack. Third, we'll look at a phrase that describes the act of making things unclear, more complicated, or confusing, often deliberately. Muddy the waters. And finally, a very descriptive and somewhat theatrical idiom for something that is designed to deceive, distract, or mislead, often by creating an impressive but ultimately hollow appearance. Smoke and mirrors.
Those are some really vivid ones indeed, Emma. I can already picture the scenarios unfolding for each of them. They cover such a good range of common human experiences and situations you might find yourself talking about, or needing to describe. I think our listeners are in for a treat.
They really do, and they offer such colorful ways to express these ideas. Now, before we delve headfirst into our first idiom, a quick, heartfelt, and sincere request from both of us here at Idiom Insights. If you're enjoying learning with us, if you're finding these episodes helpful and engaging for your English language journey, please take just a moment right now to subscribe or follow our podcast on whatever platform you're using. It's completely free, and it's the very best way to make sure you don't miss out on any of our future idiom explorations.
Indeed. And while you're there hitting that like button, giving us a 5-star rating, or leaving a short positive review also makes a massive, tangible difference to us. It truly helps other passionate English learners discover idiom insights. And your support, your encouragement, genuinely brightens our day and motivates us to keep creating. So a huge thank you in advance from both of us.
Thank you indeed. Your support means the world. Right, with that important note out of the way, let's jump enthusiastically into our first idiom of the day. Jack, what can you tell us about the rather unfortunate sounding add insult to injury?
Add insult to injury. Wow, this one feels a bit negative just saying it, doesn't it? It evokes a rather unpleasant image. What does this idiom mean, Emma? Does it literally involve someone being physically injured and then, on top of that, someone actually being mean or insulting to them?
Well, not always literally with a physical injury, Jack, although it certainly can be used in that context. More broadly, the idiom add insult to injury means to make an already bad, unfortunate, or difficult situation even worse, often through an additional action or comment that feels particularly unfair, unkind, or frustrating. It's when something unfortunate happens. That's the injury. And then something else happens, often something that feels like a deliberate offense, a thoughtless slight, or a careless mistake, that makes the original bad situation even more difficult to bear, more painful, or more upsetting.
Ah, I see. So the injury is the initial bad situation or misfortune, and the insult is the subsequent, unwelcome event or remark that exacerbates it. It's like piling on more misery, or as you said, making it harder to bear. Can you give me a classic everyday example to help solidify that?
A very common example would be losing your job. That's the initial injury, a very significant and bad situation. Then, if on the very same day, your car breaks down on the way home, leaving you stranded, that would be adding insult to injury. The car breaking down makes the already terrible situation of losing your job even more stressful, inconvenient, and financially difficult. Or imagine you fail an important exam that you studied really hard for, which is bad enough, the injury. Then your teacher, perhaps insensitively, makes a sarcastic comment in front of the class about how they knew you wouldn't pass. That's definitely adding insult to injury, because it's a hurtful, personal comment compounding your existing failure and disappointment.
Got it. So it's not just two unrelated bad things happening in sequence, but the second bad thing feels particularly unfair, frustrating, or upsetting because of the first bad thing. It almost feels like the universe is conspiring against you, or someone is being deliberately cruel. It rubs salt in the wound, you could say. Ah, another great idiom. Perhaps for a future episode of Idiom Insights.
Exactly. You've hit the nail on the head there. Another idiom for us. It often has that distinct feeling of compounded unfairness, or that someone is being incredibly inconsiderate, tactless, or even deliberately unkind on top of your existing misfortune. It really amplifies the negative feeling, the frustration, or the pain of the original problem. You'll hear people use it frequently when complaining about a series of unfortunate events that seem linked, or when describing someone's unhelpful, insensitive, or hurtful reaction to their existing problem.
So, to use a personal example, if my favorite football team loses a crucial championship match, that's the painful injury. And then, to make matters worse, the winning team's fans decide to start singing their victory songs loudly right outside my window all night long. That's the infuriating insult. That would most definitely be adding insult to injury. It would drive me mad.
It certainly would, Jack. That sounds incredibly annoying and like a perfect, albeit frustrating, example. It perfectly captures that sense of making an already bad and painful situation even more painful, frustrating, or difficult to endure.
Okay, I think I have a solid grasp of add insult to injury now. It means making a bad situation worse, especially by adding something, an event, a comment, an action that feels like a further offense, burden, or slight. Shall we hear Mia and Mark using this idiom in one of our carefully crafted scenarios?
Let's listen in. I wonder what unfortunate sequence of events might be happening to one of them to warrant this particular idiom.
Oh no, Mark, you look completely stressed out and dejected. What happened? Did you finally get the news about your promotion application? You were so hopeful.
Yeah, Mia, I did. Unfortunately, the news wasn't good. I didn't get it. I was really hoping for that step up, you know? It's pretty disappointing, honestly. That's the main thing weighing on me.
Oh, Mark, I'm so incredibly sorry to hear that. That's really tough news to take, especially after you poured so much hard work and dedication into that application. I know how much it meant to you.
Thanks, Mia, I appreciate that. And then, to add insult to injury, when I got back to my desk feeling pretty low, I found an email announcing that the company is actually reducing everyone's travel budget significantly starting next month. So not only did I not get the promotion I was counting on, but now my essential work trips are going to be more complicated to arrange, probably less comfortable and potentially less effective. It just feels like everything is conspiring to go wrong at once today.
Wow, Mark, that's really rough. That's a double whammy of bad news. Losing out on the promotion is bad enough and a huge letdown on its own, but then having that extra piece of frustrating news about the budget piled on top of it right after, that definitely feels like adding insult to injury. I'm really sorry you're having such a monumentally difficult and disheartening day.
Oof, poor Mark. That dialogue shows the idiom perfectly, doesn't it? Not getting the promotion was the initial injury or the significant piece of bad news, and then the subsequent news about the reduced travel budget was the insult that made the whole situation feel even worse, more frustrating, and perhaps even a bit personal for Mark.
Exactly. It wasn't just two separate, unrelated bad things happening on the same day. The second piece of bad news directly impacted his work further and amplified the negative impact and discouragement of the first. Mia's empathetic reaction also clearly showed she understood the connection and the increased difficulty and frustration the second event caused Mark.
It's a very common and relatable way to express that feeling when misfortune seems to be piling up against you, one thing after another. It really captures that sense of, can this day get any worse?
It really is a potent phrase. So next time something bad happens, and then something else comes along, seemingly out of nowhere, to make it even worse or more unbearable, remember the idiom, add insult to injury.
And we'd love to hear from our listeners. Can you think of a time you experienced a situation where this idiom would perfectly apply? Maybe something that happened to you or someone you know? Share your story in the comment section below this episode or on our social media.
That's a great idea, Jack. Sharing experiences helps us all learn. Let's move on now to our second incredibly useful idiom in this episode of Idiom Insights. This one is much more positive and is all about being understanding and patient towards others.
Our second idiom today, a much kinder one, is cut somebody some slack.
Cut somebody some slack. This one definitely sounds more positive and considerate than the last one. What exactly does it mean to cut somebody some slack, Jack? Does it involve actual ropes or something becoming loose and less tense?
Not literally with ropes or sailing equipment, Emma, although the mental image of having more slack or freedom from tension, a bit of looseness, can be quite helpful in understanding the meaning. To cut somebody some slack means to be less critical of them than you might normally be, to be more lenient, more forgiving, more understanding, or to give them more freedom to make a mistake or underperform without immediately judging them harshly or coming down on them like a ton of bricks.
I see. So, if someone makes a mistake or isn't performing at their best, instead of being very strict, critical, or demanding, you choose to give them some understanding, a bit of leeway, or a break. You might forgive a minor error, overlook a small failing, or lower your expectations temporarily, perhaps because you know they are under a lot of pressure, or they're new to a task, or simply having a genuinely bad day.
Exactly. You are essentially reducing the pressure on them, not holding them to the absolute strictest standard or your usual expectations at that particular moment. You cut them some slack. For instance, if a colleague who is usually incredibly punctual and reliable arrives noticeably late to an important meeting one morning, looking flustered, instead of immediately demanding a strict explanation or reprimanding them, you might choose to cut them some slack, assuming there was a legitimate reason and not make a big deal out of it, at least not right away.
That makes perfect sense. It's about showing empathy, isn't it? And recognizing that people aren't perfect robots, that we all have off days, and that external circumstances can significantly impact performance. You might cut someone some slack if they are learning something new and inevitably make mistakes. You don't criticize them harshly or make them feel inadequate because you understand they are still in the process of learning and improving. It's about fostering a supportive environment.
Precisely. Or if you know someone is going through a particularly difficult personal situation, like a family illness, a bereavement, or financial worries, they might be a bit distracted at work, seem less engaged, or not be performing at their usual top-level efficiency. In that kind of situation, a good manager or understanding colleagues should probably cut them some slack, be more patient, and be more understanding of their temporary dip in performance or their occasional absent-mindedness.
It's really about making a conscious choice not to be overly strict, judgmental, or critical when there are valid reasons why someone might not be at their absolute best or might make a small error that they wouldn't normally make. You are easing up on them a bit, giving them some breathing room.
So, to summarize, cut somebody some slack means to be less critical, more lenient, more forgiving, or more understanding towards someone, often because of mitigating circumstances or because they are new, inexperienced, or in the process of learning. Are you ready to hear Mia and Mark use this idiom in one of their everyday dialogues?
Let's listen in with anticipation. I wonder how they might use it when discussing someone else, perhaps a colleague, a friend, or even a family member who needs a bit of understanding.
I simply can't believe how disorganized and unprepared Sarah was in that client presentation this morning. She forgot half her notes, stumbled over her words, and seemed completely lost at times. It was really unprofessional and reflected poorly on the whole team.
Yeah, I have to agree, it definitely wasn't her best presentation, Mark. It was a bit shaky. But, maybe we should cut her some slack today, just this once.
Cut her some slack? Why on earth should we? It was an important client. She should have been thoroughly prepared, regardless.
Well, I happened to overhear her earlier, and I heard she was up almost all night with her sick child. The little one apparently had a really high fever, and she barely got any sleep. Plus, remember, she was also juggling that incredibly urgent client request that came in late yesterday afternoon and required immediate attention. She was probably completely exhausted, running on empty, and understandably distracted.
Okay, I wasn't aware of all that. That does put things in a different perspective. You're right. Given everything she's clearly dealing with personally and professionally right now, maybe I am being a bit too harsh and judgmental. She usually does such consistently great work for us.
Exactly. She's clearly under a tremendous amount of pressure at the moment, juggling multiple serious issues. Let's just cut her some slack this time. I'm sure she'll be back on form soon.
That dialogue perfectly and compassionately illustrates the idiom. Mark was initially, and perhaps understandably, being critical of Sarah's poor performance. But Mia gently provided the crucial context, the mitigating circumstances, and thoughtfully suggested they should be more understanding, less judgmental, and less strict. In other words, they should cut her some slack.
Yes, Mia's intervention was key. She provided the background information that made it entirely reasonable and compassionate to be lenient in that specific instance. It beautifully shows how this idiom is often used when you're encouraging someone else to be less critical, or when you're explaining your own reasons for choosing to be understanding and forgiving.
It's a wonderful idiom for promoting empathy, kindness, and patience in our daily interactions with others, whether at work, at home, or in our communities. A little understanding goes a long way.
It really, really is. A very humane expression. So, next time you think someone is being a tad too harsh or overly critical, or you want to suggest a more understanding and patient approach towards someone, you can use the idiom, cut somebody some slack.
And of course, we'd love to hear from our listeners. Can you recall a time when you thought someone truly deserved to be cut some slack? Or perhaps a situation where you yourself really needed someone to cut you some slack? Share your insightful examples and stories in the comments section below the episode.
That's a fantastic idea, Jack. Connecting idioms to real-life experiences makes them so much more memorable. Let's move on now to our third intriguing idiom in this episode of Idiom Insights. This one describes the act of making things less clear or more confusing.
Our third idiom for today, which conjures up a rather messy image, is muddy the waters.
Muddy the waters. This immediately brings to my mind a clear, pristine stream or a calm river suddenly becoming cloudy, opaque, and difficult to see through because someone has stirred up all the mud and sediment from the bottom. What does this evocative phrase mean when we apply it to conversations, arguments, or complex situations, Jack?
That visual image is exactly right, Emma. It's a perfect analogy. The idiom muddy the waters means to make a situation, a discussion, an argument, or an issue less clear, more confusing, more complicated, or more difficult to understand and resolve. You typically do this by introducing irrelevant information, confusing or contradictory details, complex jargon unnecessarily, or by making relatively simple things sound far more complicated than they actually are.
Ah, I see. So, instead of striving for clarity and making things easy to understand, you are actively doing something or saying something that makes them harder to see, grasp, or navigate. Just like stirring up mud obscures the clarity of water. Why would someone want to do that? Is it always intentional?
That's a great question. People might muddy the waters for different reasons, and it's not always malicious. Sometimes it's purely accidental. Perhaps they are just genuinely bad at explaining things clearly, or they are disorganized in their thoughts and consequently bring up too many tangential or confusing points. However, sometimes it can be quite deliberate. Someone might muddy the waters intentionally to hide the truth about something, to distract from the real core issue to avoid accountability, or to make a relatively simple problem seem overwhelmingly complicated and thus too difficult to solve or address effectively.
That makes a lot of sense. For example, if you're in a meeting trying to discuss a very specific, well-defined problem, and someone in the group keeps bringing up totally unrelated past issues or overly complex historical background that isn't strictly necessary for the current decision, they are probably muddying the waters. They are making it significantly harder for everyone else to focus on, understand, and resolve the original central problem.
Precisely. Or a classic example. If a politician is asked a direct yes or no question about a straightforward policy issue, but they respond with a long, rambling, convoluted answer that touches upon many different, often unrelated topics, without ever directly and clearly answering the original question, they are almost certainly muddying the waters. They do this to avoid giving a clear, accountable answer, or to confuse the audience.
It definitely implies transforming something that could be clear, simple, or transparent into something confusing, opaque, and murky. Just like that muddy water where you can't see the bottom clearly, let alone find what you're looking for. This, in turn, makes finding a viable solution, reaching a consensus, or making an informed decision much, much harder.
So, to reiterate, muddy the waters means to make a situation, discussion, or issue more confusing, less clear, and harder to understand, often by introducing irrelevant, distracting, or unnecessarily complicated information. Are you ready to hear Mia and Mark encounter this in their conversation?
Let's listen in. I wonder if they are trying to solve a seemingly simple problem that one of them, perhaps inadvertently, is making unnecessarily difficult or confusing.
Okay, Mark, so we urgently need to decide on the definitive date for the team training workshop next month. After checking everyone's availability, we have 2 possible dates that work for the vast majority of people, the 15th or the 22nd. Which one of those 2 do you think is better, considering everything?
Well, Mia, before we actually commit to a date, I think we also need to thoroughly consider the precise budget allocation for the training materials, and then we need to check whether the external catering company we used successfully last year is available on those dates. And also, we mustn't forget the fact that the new company-wide software update is scheduled to be rolled out in October, which might significantly affect the content and relevance of the training.
Whoa, Mark, hold on a second there. We're just trying to pick the date right now. A single, simple decision, talking about the intricacies of the budget, the availability of caterers, and potential future software updates at this exact moment is just muddying the waters for this straightforward choice. Can we please just focus on which of the 2 proposed dates works best for everyone for now?
Oh, right, you're absolutely correct. Sorry about that, Mia. I guess my mind was racing ahead and I was thinking too broadly, considering too many variables at once.
It's okay, it happens. But let's try to keep this particular decision clear and focused. Dates first, then we can systematically discuss all those other important but separate details, one step at a time.
That's a fantastic, everyday example of the idiom in action. Mark, perhaps completely unintentionally and just trying to be thorough, brought in a whole host of other, albeit relevant, details that simply weren't needed for the immediate and simple task of choosing a date. This in turn made the simple question more confusing and harder to resolve quickly. Mia correctly and politely identified that he was muddying the waters.
Yes, exactly. She very skillfully tried to keep the focus clear and direct, like wanting to keep the water clear so they could easily see the most straightforward answer. Which date to pick? It clearly shows how the idiom is used when someone, intentionally or not, is making a situation more complicated, convoluted, or harder to navigate than it truly needs to be.
It's definitely a very useful idiom for those frustrating moments when a conversation or discussion goes off track, loses focus, and becomes unnecessarily complex and less clear. We've all been in those meetings, I'm sure.
It certainly is. So, next time someone makes a relatively simple issue confusing by overcomplicating it, or brings in a flood of irrelevant information that makes a discussion hard to follow and derails progress, you can accurately say they are muddying the waters.
And as always, we'd love to hear from our listeners. Can you think of a time you witnessed someone skillfully, or perhaps clumsily, muddy the waters? Or maybe a time you realized with a cringe that you had accidentally muddied the waters yourself? Share your illuminating experiences and observations in the comments below.
That's a wonderful idea, Jack, prompting that self-reflection. Now, we've reached our fourth and final fascinating idiom for this episode of Idiom Insights. This one is all about the often deceptive interplay between appearances and underlying reality.
Our final idiom for today, and it's a very visual one, is smoke and mirrors.
Smoke and mirrors. This sounds very theatrical, Jack, doesn't it? It conjures up images of elaborate stage magic tricks, illusions, and perhaps even a bit of misdirection. Is that imagery directly related to the meaning of the idiom?
Absolutely, Emma. You're spot on. The image comes directly from old-time stage magic acts or illusions, where magicians skillfully used actual smoke to obscure things or create an atmosphere, and strategically placed mirrors to create false reflections, hide mechanisms, or make things appear or disappear. These were used to create deceptive appearances, to make something look very different from what it really was, or to distract the audience. So the idiom smoke and mirrors means something: a plan, a presentation, an explanation, a product that is designed to deceive, confuse, or distract someone from the actual truth. It's often a show or an appearance that looks incredibly impressive, convincing, or sophisticated on the surface, but ultimately lacks real substance, is hollow, or is primarily used to hide underlying problems, weaknesses, or a less appealing reality.
So it's essentially about creating a captivating illusion or a deceptive facade to deliberately hide the reality, which is usually a less pleasant, less impressive, or more problematic reality. It's like putting on a grand, distracting performance to make something look significantly better, more advanced, or more successful than it genuinely is.
Exactly. Think about a company that is actually struggling quite badly financially, perhaps on the brink of bankruptcy, but to attract new investors or reassure existing ones, they put on a huge, incredibly fancy, and expensive launch party for a new product. They have elaborate stage designs, impressive pyrotechnics, famous guest speakers, and exciting, loud music. All of that glitz and glamour might be pure smoke and mirrors, meticulously designed to make investors, the media, and the public think the company is thriving and doing brilliantly, when in reality they are in serious trouble and the product itself might be flawed.
That's a very clear and illustrative example. The flashy, expensive appearance is strategically used to distract from and conceal the underlying financial problems or product deficiencies. It's a sophisticated form of deception, not necessarily through outright lies, but by creating a powerfully misleading impression using impressive but ultimately superficial or irrelevant elements to hide the unpalatable truth.
It can be used in a vast array of contexts. Maybe someone gives a business presentation that is filled with stunning, high-tech graphics, animations, and a lot of impressive sounding, trendy buzzwords. However, when you look closely at the actual content, the data is missing, vague, or doesn't logically support their conclusions. In such a case, you might say the presentation was all smoke and mirrors. It looked fantastic and professional on the surface, but it had no real substance, no solid foundation.
Or even in more personal, everyday situations. Someone might consistently put on a big, flamboyant show of being incredibly confident, highly successful, and always in control, constantly talking themselves up and boasting about their achievements. But in reality, they might be deeply insecure, struggling professionally or personally, or covering up significant failures. Their overly confident public facade might just be a carefully constructed layer of smoke and mirrors designed to hide their true feelings of inadequacy or their actual precarious situation.
It's fundamentally about the stark, often deliberate difference between appearance and reality, where the appearance is intentionally crafted to be misleading, to create a false sense of security or excitement, or to distract from a less appealing or even damning truth. It's about style over substance used deceptively.
So to summarize, smoke and mirrors refers to something deliberately designed to deceive, confuse, or distract, creating a misleadingly impressive or complex appearance to hide a reality that is often far less impressive, much simpler, or even problematic. Are you ready to hear Mia and Mark encounter a situation that might involve some smoke and mirrors?
Let's listen in with a critical ear. I suspect they might be discussing something that wasn't quite what it initially seemed to be, something that promised more than it delivered.
Mark, did you manage to go to that big, highly publicized product demonstration the new tech company, Innovate Solutions put on yesterday? It was the one everyone in the industry was buzzing about for weeks.
I did, Mia. Yeah, I made sure to be there. And I have to say, it looked incredibly impressive on the surface. The stage design was absolutely amazing, very futuristic. The music was pumping and energetic, and their main spokesperson was extremely dynamic, charismatic, and a very polished presenter. They showcased these seemingly fantastic, almost science fiction-like futuristic features for their new device.
Right, that's what I heard. It all seems so incredibly advanced, so groundbreaking, almost revolutionary. So what did you ultimately think? Are you convinced their new product is genuinely going to change the entire industry, as they claimed?
Honestly, Mia, after the initial dazzle wore off, I left feeling like it was probably all just smoke and mirrors. They spent an enormous amount of time and budget on the dazzling visuals, the slick animations, and the exciting high-energy presentation style. But crucially, they didn't actually show the product working in a real, live, unscripted environment, and they very skillfully avoided or deflected any specific, challenging technical questions from the audience about how those futuristic features actually function, what technology underpins them, or if they're even practically possible with current technology.
Now that you mention it, I see what you mean. Reflecting on the highlights I saw online, they were indeed very vague and non-committal on the practical nitty-gritty details, weren't they? It was undeniably a fantastic show, a real spectacle, but perhaps, as you suspect, the actual substance, the core technology, wasn't really there or wasn't ready.
Exactly my impression. A whole lot of flash, a ton of hype, but I strongly suspect it was mostly smoke and mirrors, designed to generate massive media buzz, attract naive investors, and cleverly hide the fact that the actual product either isn't ready for market, doesn't work as promised, or perhaps it doesn't even exist in a functional form yet.
That's a perfect, very contemporary illustration of the idiom. The incredibly impressive high-tech presentation was the smoke, and the carefully crafted illusions of functionality were the mirrors. It was all meticulously designed to create a misleadingly positive impression and distract from the critical lack of concrete evidence that the product actually worked as advertised or was even viable.
And Mark, with his discerning eye, saw through the elaborate illusion. He recognized that the flashy, exciting appearance was likely hiding a far less impressive, possibly non-existent reality. It really shows how this idiom is effectively used to describe something that is superficially impressive and designed to awe, but ultimately lacks real substance, is fundamentally hollow, or is intended to deceive and manipulate.
It's such a great and evocative idiom for describing those all-too-common situations where appearances are skillfully manipulated to mislead, whether it's in the world of business, politics, marketing, or even in our everyday social interactions. It encourages a healthy skepticism.
Absolutely. A very useful one to have in your linguistic toolkit. So, next time you encounter something that looks absolutely amazing, perhaps a bit too good to be true, and you suspect it's primarily designed to hide a less pleasant, less competent, or more problematic reality, you can confidently say it's all smoke and mirrors.
And of course, we'd love to hear from our astute listeners. Can you recall a time when you recognized that something, a product, a promise, a person's persona, was just smoke and mirrors? What was it, and what made you suspicious? Share your insightful examples and detective stories in the comments below.
We always thoroughly enjoy reading your contributions and learning from your experiences. Well, Emma, that brings us to the end of another enlightening session. We've successfully explored 4 more fantastic and highly practical idioms in this episode of Idiom Insights.
We certainly have, Jack. It's been a very productive session. Just to quickly recap for everyone tuning into Idiom Insights today, especially those who might have joined us midway, we learned:
firstly, add insult to injury, which means to make an already bad or unfortunate situation even worse, often with an added slight or burden.
Secondly, cut somebody some slack, meaning to be less critical, more lenient, or more understanding and forgiving towards someone, especially when they're facing difficulties.
Thirdly, muddy the waters, which describes the act of making a situation, discussion, or issue more confusing, less clear, and harder to understand or resolve.
And finally, smoke and mirrors, referring to something designed to deceive, confuse, or mislead, usually by creating an impressive but ultimately hollow or distracting appearance to hide a less favorable reality.
4 really common, incredibly useful, and wonderfully descriptive idioms that you can start listening for in conversations around you, and hopefully, with a bit of practice, start using confidently yourself. Remember, as with all language learning, hearing them in context and actively practicing them is absolutely key to making them a natural and fluent part of your English vocabulary.
Absolutely, Jack. Couldn't agree more. Don't be afraid to try them out in your own conversations or writing. And if you enjoyed this episode of Idiom Insights and found it valuable, please do take a moment to give us a like, a share, and perhaps a glowing positive review on your podcast platform of choice. Your support really does help us continue creating these episodes for learners like you.
And most importantly, make sure you're subscribed or following Idiom Insights so you don't miss our next linguistic adventure into the fascinating world of English expressions. We've always got more to explore.
Thank you all so much for joining us today. It's been an absolute pleasure exploring these idioms with you all, and we hope you feel a little more confident and equipped in your English.
Keep learning, keep listening, keep practicing, and we'll catch you next time on Idiom Insights.
Goodbye, everyone, and happy idiom hunting.
See ya. Take care.